The unexpected proposal, a dancer, a billionaire, and a love 20 years in the making welcome, dear listeners, to our special corner where the most beautiful stories come to life and awaken the deepest emotions of the heart. Today, I've brought you a story that will captivate you from the very first moment. It's the story of Eleanor Green, a 30-year-old virgin dance teacher who received the most unexpected proposal of her life, to have a child with her best friend, who had become a millionaire. Welcome to the endless story. Before we dive into this journey of love and courage, tell me in the comments, what's your name, and where are you watching us from? The story I share today began in the port city of Brighton, where Eleanor Green danced her dreams while living a tranquil, simple life. She never imagined that her childhood friend, now a magnate of the port business, would arrive with a proposal that would change everything and reveal a love that had grown in silence for over 20 years. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and come discover how an unexpected proposal can reveal the truest love of our lives. A childhood bond. The sound of waves crashing against Brighton Pier mingled with the soft music echoing from the cultural center. Eleanor Green adjusted her messy bun and watched her students execute the contemporary dance sequence she had taught. Each movement flowed like the tides she had known since childhood, growing up in that port city that pulsed between the modernity of large ships and the nostalgia of the historic old town. At 30, Eleanor had found her peace in simplicity. Her mornings began with strong coffee in the kitchen of her compact apartment in Hove, followed by classes at the cultural center, and on free afternoons, long walks on the beach. She sought nothing more than that. Dance as an expression of her soul, the sea as a constant companion, and the tranquility of a life without major upheavals. "Teacher Ellie, is everything all right?" asked Lily, one of her most dedicated students, noticing that she seemed distant. "Of course, dear. Just thinking about the choreography for next month's festival." Eleanor smiled, but her thoughts were far away. There was something in the air that March afternoon that left her uneasy, as if the wind brought changes she couldn't yet decipher. As she put away the sound equipment, her phone vibrated. A simple message, but it made her heart race. "I need to talk to you. Can I come over tonight? It's important. Arthur, Arthur, Arthur Reed." The name alone was enough to transport her 20 years back in time, when they were just two children running through the school hallways. He was always impeccably dressed, even at 12. She and simple, but always clean, clothes her grandmother managed to provide. They had grown up in Brighton, but in completely different realities. Arthur was the only son of Robert Reed, owner of one of the country's largest port logistics companies. Eleanor was raised by her grandma Margaret after losing her mother as a child, in a modest apartment just 10 blocks from the Reed mansion, but which might as well have been on another planet. Their friendship was one of those inexplicable childhood connections. It began one rainy afternoon, when Eleanor found Arthur sitting alone in the school library, reading a book about navigation. She approached him with the natural curiosity of an 8-year-old girl. "Why are you always alone?" Arthur looked up, surprised. Most children avoided him, intimidated by his family's reputation, or simply because he always seemed too serious for his age. "I don't like noise," he replied simply. "Me neither. Can I stay here?" And so it began. Entire afternoons in the library, then walks through Brighton's old town, Arthur talking about the ships arriving at the port, Eleanor showing him the dance steps she learned in free classes at the community center. He was fascinated by her grace, she by the way he knew every detail of the city and the sea. Eleanor's grandma Margaret adored it when Arthur came over for dinner. "That boy has a kind heart," she always said. "Money doesn't change that." When they turned 16, their friendship faced its first real test. Arthur's father died in a maritime accident during a routine inspection on one of the company's ships. His mother, devastated by the loss, fell into a deep depression and moved to France, leaving Arthur alone with the responsibility of a business empire he had inherited prematurely. Eleanor was the only person who managed to break through the barrier of pain he erected around himself in those difficult months. She spent hours sitting beside him in his room, sometimes just in silence, other times dancing softly when she perceived he needed something to calm his wounded soul. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she would whisper to him on nights when she found him studying business reports late, trying to understand the adult world he had been forced to accept. "If I don't carry it, who will?" he would reply. But he always held her hand when she offered it. At 18, their paths diverged geographically, but not emotionally. Arthur left Brighton to study business in London, preparing to officially take over the company. Eleanor won a scholarship to study dance at a renowned school in Birmingham. The goodbyes were harder than they imagined. "You'll forget me when you're dancing on the big stages," Arthur said the last night before her trip. "Impossible. You're in every movement I make." He kissed her forehead, a tender gesture that carried all the affection of years of friendship. "Promise we'll always be friends forever." They kept in touch religiously during the first few years. Letters, then emails, calls on Sundays. Arthur talked about the pressure of running a company at 20, the difficult decisions, the loneliness of always being surrounded by people who saw him merely as the reed heir. Eleanor shared her artistic discoveries, her performances, her dreams of one day having her own dance school. But adult life has a cruel way of creating distance. Calls became more spaced out, emails shorter. When Eleanor returned to Brighton at 25, after a knee injury that ended her career as a professional dancer, she discovered that Arthur had become what his father always dreamed of, a respected and feared businessman, absolute owner of an empire that expanded beyond Brighton's port. They met a few times in the following years, casual encounters in the city center, always cordial, but laden with a distance that hurt more than either of them was willing to admit. Arthur seemed enveloped in an invisible armor, always accompanied by advisors or girlfriends, who lasted only a few months. Eleanor had focused on rebuilding her life through teaching, finding a new form of fulfillment in transmitting dance. Now, at 30, it had been over 2 years since they had spoken directly. Eleanor typed her response with trembling fingers. "Of course, I'll be home from 8. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Eleanor tried to concentrate on the advanced class, but her mind constantly drifted back to Arthur. What could be so important? Why now, after so long? At 7:30 p.m., Eleanor was in her apartment changing out of her dance clothes into a simple navy blue dress. She looked in the mirror and tried to ignore the nervousness growing in her chest. She brewed strong coffee, as she always did when anxious, and tidied her small living room for the 3rd time. The unthinkable. Request at a métoile. 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Eleanor needed a moment to process the image before her. Arthur Reed was there, but he wasn't the ruthless businessman who appeared in local newspapers. He wore dark jeans and a simple white shirt, no tie. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a vulnerability in his green eyes she hadn't seen since his teenage years. "Hello, Ellie." His voice was the same, but it carried a weariness that touched her heart immediately. "Arthur, please come in." He hesitated for a second on the doorstep, as if giving himself one last chance to retreat. Then he entered, and the apartment instantly seemed smaller with his presence. "Coffee?" Eleanor offered, trying to sound natural. "Please." They sat at the small kitchen table, as they did when they were teenagers at Grandma Margaret's house. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was charged with expectation. "Are you all right?" Eleanor finally asked. "You look tired." Arthur smiled for the first time, a small but genuine smile. "You always manage to read me better than anyone else. It's part of having grown up together." He took a sip of coffee and sighed. "Ellie, I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound completely crazy." Eleanor felt her heart race. "What is it, Arthur?" Arthur looked at her directly, with the same intensity as when they were children, and he was about to share some important secret. "I want to have a child." The phrase hung in the air. Eleanor blinked, processing. "That's wonderful, Arthur. Have you found someone special?" "No," he shook his head. "I haven't, and that's exactly the problem." Eleanor frowned, confused. "Over the past 10 years, Arthur continued, I've had relationships that never lasted more than a few months. Incredible women, but all interested in Arthur Reed, the businessman. None of them truly knew me. None of them saw me as simply Arthur." His voice carried a deep sadness that made Eleanor want to reach for his hand, but she restrained herself. "I wake up every morning in an empty penthouse. I go to an office where I'm surrounded by people who depend on me. I come home alone and fall asleep alone. I'm 36, Ellie. I have enough money to support 10 families, but I don't have a family." "Arthur," Eleanor began, but he interrupted. "Let me finish, please." He took a deep breath. "I always wanted to be a father. I always imagined having a child to teach about ships, about the sea, about everything my father taught me before he died. But I no longer believe I'm going to find someone who will love me for who I truly am." Eleanor felt a squeeze in her chest. She knew Arthur well enough to know he wasn't being dramatic. He was being brutally honest. Then I thought, and I know this will sound insane, but there's one person in the world who truly knows me. A person who saw me at my worst and didn't abandon me. A person I trust completely. Eleanor's heart stopped. "You!" The word echoed in the small kitchen. Eleanor looked at him, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. "Arthur, what exactly are you asking me?" He leaned slightly forward, with the same seriousness as when they made friendship pacts in childhood. "I'm asking you to have a child with me." Eleanor abruptly stood up. "What?" "I'm not asking you to marry me," Arthur said quickly. "I'm not asking for a romantic relationship. I'm asking you to raise a child with me, as partners, as the best friends we've always been." Eleanor began to pace back and forth in the small kitchen, her hands trembling. "Arthur, that's crazy." "Why?" He remained seated, but his voice carried a growing urgency. "Think about it. We've known each other for over 20 years. We trust each other. I can provide anything a child needs materially. You have the purest, most generous heart I know. We would be good parents. But a child isn't a business project, Arthur. It's a person. It's love. It's a real family. And you think I don't love you?" The question came out more intensely than he intended, and both fell silent for a moment. Arthur quickly corrected himself. "I mean, as a friend, you're the most important person in my life, Ellie. You always were." Ellie stopped pacing and faced him. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of the lonely child in the library, of the teenager who cried in her arms when he lost his father. "And what if I say no?" she asked softly. "Then nothing changes between us, I promise. This conversation never happened, and we remain friends as we always were." "And what if I say yes?" Arthur smiled, and for the first time in years, Ellie saw genuine hope on his face. "Then we create a family. Not traditional, perhaps, but real. A child who will grow up knowing they are unconditionally loved by two people who truly care about each other." Ellie sat back down, her head spinning with possibilities and fears. "I need to think." "Of course. How much time do you need?" "I don't know. A few days, a week?" Arthur nodded and stood up. "There's one more thing I need to tell you." "What?" I never stopped misting you, Ellie. All these years, all those girlfriends, all those businesses. Nothing filled the void your absence left in my life." He walked to the door, but turned before opening it. "You were always my safe harbor, the only person who makes me feel at home." After he left, Ellie stood in the middle of the living room, her heart pounding irregularly. She looked out the window and saw the sea in the distance, the lights of the ships flickering in the darkness like fallen stars in the water. A child with Arthur. The idea was absurd, impossible, completely outside of any plan she had made for her life. Then, why, deep in her heart, did it not seem so strange? Eleanor instinctively touched her own belly, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like not to be alone in the world anymore. She imagined a child with Arthur's green eyes and her own stubbornness, growing up between dance and the sea, surrounded by love, even if that love came in an unconventional form. She slept little that night, and in the days that followed, Arthur's question resonated in every movement she made, in every class she taught, in every sunset she watched from Brighton Beach. The answer was growing inside her, slowly but inevitably, like a tide that cannot be contained. What choice do you think Eleanor will make? Would you accept such a proposal from your best friend? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A mentor's wisdom. The next 3 days passed like a dense fog over Brighton. Eleanor woke before dawn, unable to go back to sleep, and walked along the deserted beach as the first rays of sun painted the sea golden. Arthur's words echoed in her mind with every step on the wet sand. "You were always my safe harbor." During classes, she could only concentrate halfway. Her movements maintained technical precision, but the passion that normally overflowed when she danced was missing. Lily, her most observant student, commented after a particularly tense class, "Teacher Ellie, you're dancing with your mind, not your heart. Has something happened?" Eleanor forced a smile. "Just personal matters, dear. Nothing that will affect our classes." But the truth was that Arthur's proposal had completely disrupted her orderly world. At night, sitting on her balcony with a partial view of the sea, she found herself imagining impossible scenarios. A child running on the sand, Arthur teaching about the ships passing in the distance, she herself cradling a baby while singing melodies she had learned from Grandma Margaret. On Thursday morning, after another restless night, Eleanor decided she needed advice. There was only one person in Brighton who knew her history with Arthur and who could help her see the situation clearly. Professor Mary lived in an old house in the historic old town near the Maritime Museum. At 74, she had been Eleanor's mentor since adolescence, the person who had recognized her talent for dance and encouraged her to pursue her dreams, even when they seemed impossible for a poor girl from Brighton. "Eleanor, my dear," Mary greeted her with a tight hug. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in. I just made muffins." Mary's house was a refuge from time. Antique furniture, black and white photographs on the walls, the constant smell of cinnamon and coffee. They sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by plants Mary grew in makeshift pots. "You didn't come here just for a social visit," Mary said, after pouring the coffee. "I know that look. It's the same one you had at 16 when you were deciding whether to accept the scholarship for Birmingham." Eleanor smiled. Mary always managed to read her like an open book. "It's about Arthur." "Ah." Mary settled more comfortably in her chair. "I haven't heard that name in years. How is he?" "Well, physically well, but—" Eleanor hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mary, he asked me something. A very unusual request." She told her everything. The unexpected visit, Arthur's loneliness, his desire to have a child, the proposal to do it together. Mary listened in silence, occasionally making small gestures of understanding. When Eleanor finished, Mary remained thoughtful for a long moment, slowly stirring her coffee. "You know," she finally said, "I always knew there was something special between you two. It was friendship, Mary. We've been friends since childhood." "My dear," Mary smiled tenderly. "At 74, I've learned that love has many faces. The romantic love we see in movies is just one of them. There's the love of deep friendship, the love of absolute trust, the love of someone who chooses to stay by your side in the most difficult moments." Eleanor looked out the window, watching the constant movement of the old town. But a child is so definitive, so permanent, and that scares you. "It terrifies me," Eleanor laughed without humor. "I built a quiet, predictable life. I teach dance. I have my independence. No one depends on me, besides my students. Having a child would change everything." "It would change," Mary agreed. "The question is, would it change for better or for worse?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer. "Tell me about your Grandma Margaret," Mary suddenly said. "What does Grandma Margaret have to do with this?" "Humor," Eleanor sighed. "Grandma Margaret raised me after my mother died. She worked as a seamstress, earned little, but never made me feel lacking in anything important. She enrolled me in dance classes, even without having money for it. She made arrangements with the teachers so I could study. And how did she make important decisions?" Eleanor paused, a nostalgic smile forming on her lips. "She always said." She stopped. She said, "Eleanor, when you don't know which path to take, choose the one that makes your heart grow, not shrink." Mary nodded. "Wise woman. And then, does this proposal from Arthur make your heart grow or shrink?" Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to connect with her deepest feelings. She imagined herself pregnant. She imagined Arthur by her side during the months of gestation. She imagined a small child learning to walk between the two of them. "It grows," she whispered. "It scares me, but it grows. Then you already have your answer. But what if it doesn't work? What if the child complicates our friendship? What if Arthur changes his mind? And what if it does work?" Mary countered. "What if you discover you were meant to be a family? What if this child brings a happiness neither of you imagined possible?" Eleanor drank her coffee in silence, absorbing her mentor's words. "Can I tell you a story?" Mary asked. "Of course. When I was 25, I fell in love with a wonderful man. He asked me to marry him, offered a comfortable, stable life. But I was afraid of losing my independence, afraid that love wouldn't last. So I said no." Mary looked at the old photograph on the wall, showing a young dancer on a stage. 50 years later, I never married. I had a brilliant career. I traveled the world. I taught hundreds of students. But sometimes, on silent nights, I wonder what it would have been like if I had chosen love instead of fear. Do you regret it? I don't regret the life I had, but I learned that fear is not a good counselor for matters of the heart. Eleanor stayed at Mary's house until late afternoon. They talked about dance, about life, about the unexpected paths that destiny sometimes offers. When she finally said goodbye, Eleanor felt more centered, more connected with herself. That night, instead of tossing and turning in bed thinking, she decided to do something she hadn't done in months. Dance alone in her apartment. She put on soft music, closed her eyes, and let herself be guided by the movement. It was a dance without choreography, just the pure expression of everything she felt. As she moved through the small space, memories flowed like waves. Arthur at 12, sharing half his snack because he knew she sometimes came to school without eating. Arthur at 16, vulnerable and broken after his father's death, allowing her to comfort him when he couldn't cry in front of anyone else. Arthur at 18, promising they would always be friends before leaving for London. And now, Arthur at 36, successful but lonely, offering her the opportunity to build something together that neither of them had managed to build alone. The dance led her to the window, where she could see the lights of the ships in the port. Arthur had said she was his safe harbor, but perhaps he was hers too. Perhaps he always had been. What do you think Eleanor's decision will be after reflecting on Mary's advice and her own feelings? Will she accept Arthur's unconventional proposal? Share your thoughts in the comments. A love confessed on Friday morning. Eleanor woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in days. During the morning class, her movements regained their lost passion. Lily commented, "Now you're back, teacher." After classes, Eleanor went to the city center. She needed fresh air and movement to organize her thoughts. She walked through the old streets, past the cathedral, observed the constant movement of the port from where Arthur commanded his business empire. She stopped in front of a small park near the street. Some children played under the watchful eye of their mothers, and Eleanor found herself imagining what it would be like to be there, taking care of her own child. The image didn't scare her as it should have. Instead, it awakened a tenderness she didn't know existed within her. Her phone rang. A message from Arthur. "No pressure, but if you want to talk more, I'm available." "Always." Eleanor smiled. Even from a distance, he could sense when she needed space and when she needed company. She typed her response. "You can come for dinner tonight. I have something to tell you." The reply came almost instantly. "I'll be there at 7. The rest of the day passed quickly. Eleanor cleaned the apartment, prepared a simple lasagna, remembering it was Arthur's favorite dish when they were teenagers, and tried not to get too nervous about what she was about to do. At 7 o'clock sharp, Arthur rang the doorbell. When she opened the door, he looked anxious, but hopeful. "Smells good," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Lasagna, like old times." They had dinner, talking about trivial matters, her work, his company's latest acquisitions, the changes in Brighton over the years, but both knew there was a more important conversation waiting. After dessert, Eleanor carried 2 cups of coffee to the small balcony. They sat side by side, looking at the moonlit sea. "Arthur," she began, her voice firmer than she expected, "I've spent the last few days thinking a lot about your proposal." He turned to look at her, but said nothing. "I thought about our history, about who we are today, about what we want for the future." Eleanor took a deep breath, and I came to a conclusion. "What?" She looked at him directly, with the same sincerity that had always existed between them. "I accept." Arthur's face transformed. The cautious hope gave way to a pure joy he couldn't hide. "You really accept?" "I accept, but with the conditions." "Anything. First, we do this together, as equal partners. I don't want to be treated as if you're doing me a favor, or I'm doing you one. We are 2 adults choosing to build a family." Arthur nodded energetically. "Second, regardless of what happens, whether we manage to have the baby or not, whether everything goes well or goes wrong, our friendship comes first. It's the foundation of all of this." "I completely agree." "And third," Eleanor hesitated, then smiled, "we're going to do this with love. Not romantic love necessarily, but with all the love we feel for each other, as friends, as chosen family. This child deserves to be born into an environment of true love." Arthur extended his hand, and she clasped it. The grip was firm, warm, full of promises. "Thank you," he simply said, "for trusting me, for choosing to give me this opportunity." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, "for reminding me that family doesn't need to follow conventional rules to be real." They remained in silence for a moment, holding hands, looking at the sea. Both knew they had just changed their lives forever, but there was a strange peace in that certainty. "And now?" Eleanor asked. "Now we sleep," Arthur said, smiling. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to make this dream a reality." When he left that night, Eleanor went to bed, and for the first time in days, she slept soundly. Her dreams were filled with images of a child running on the beach, of Arthur teaching little hands to identify different types of boats, of herself dancing with a baby in her arms as the sun set over Brighton. Deep in her heart, she knew she had made the right decision, not because it was easy or safe, but because it was true. And as her grandma Margaret always said, the best decisions are those that make the heart grow, even when they scare the mind. What do you think will happen as they embark on this journey? Will their non-traditional approach lead to true romantic love? Share your thoughts in the comments. The evolution of love. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange mix of normality and expectation. Eleanor and Arthur met regularly to discuss the practical aspects of their decision. Medical consultations, examinations, specialized clinics. But there was something more happening between them, a growing intimacy that neither of them dared to name. Arthur had insisted on accompanying her to all medical appointments, even when it meant canceling important meetings. On their first visit to the gynecologist, he stayed in the waiting room with a nervousness that Eleanor found touching, as if he were the one who would go through the procedures. "Everything's perfect," said Dr. Hayes after reviewing all the tests. "Both of you are in excellent health. I see no obstacle to proceeding with the treatment." Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The rational part was resolved, but what about the emotional? During those days, Arthur began to appear at the cultural center to pick her up after classes. At first, he claimed he was passing by after meetings in the port area, but it soon became clear that he was making excuses to spend more time together. "You don't need to pick me up every day," Eleanor said one afternoon as they walked along Hove Beach. "I know, but I want to be present. I want you to know you're not doing this alone." There was something in the way he spoke, a tenderness that went beyond friendship. Eleanor perceived it, but didn't know how to interpret it. One night, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, Arthur was helping wash dishes when Eleanor noticed his hands trembling. "You're nervous," she observed. "I am," he admitted, without stopping to dry the dishes. "I can't stop thinking that in a few weeks you might be pregnant with our child." The word "our" resonated between them with unexpected emotional weight. "I'm nervous too," Eleanor confessed. "But it's a good nervousness, like before an important performance." Arthur smiled, but there was something restless in his eyes. "Ellie, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you ever imagine yourself as a mother? I mean, do you really imagine yourself?" Eleanor dried her hands and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Every day since I accepted. And do you imagine yourself as a father?" "Constantly." Arthur turned to look at her. "I imagine teaching our child about ships, about the sea. I imagine you dancing with them in your arms. I imagine the three of us watching the sunset on the beach." "The three of us," Eleanor repeated softly. The image was more comforting than it should have been. "It's strange," Arthur continued, "how something that started as a practical idea is becoming more emotional than I expected." Eleanor felt her heart race. "More emotional how?" Arthur hesitated, as if he were on the edge of a cliff, as if it wasn't just about having a child, as if it was about us building something together. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor looked at Arthur. She really looked. And she saw not only the childhood friend or the successful businessman, but a man who was falling in love with the idea of them as a family. And to her surprise, she realized that she was too. "Arthur, I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I don't want to complicate things. I know we agreed it would be as friends, and don't apologize." Eleanor took a step towards him. I'm also feeling something different." They looked at each other for a long moment. Arthur slowly raised his hand, as if to touch her face, but stopped halfway. "I don't want to spoil our friendship," he whispered. "And what if it doesn't spoil it? What if it just completes it?" It was Eleanor who closed the distance between them. The kiss was hesitant at first. 20 years of friendship creating an intimacy that neither of them knew how to navigate romantically. But when Arthur pulled her closer, when she felt the urgency on his lips, everything seemed to fit perfectly. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "This changes everything," Arthur said. "Or maybe it just reveals what was always there," Eleanor replied. They talked late into the night, carefully exploring the new feelings that had emerged. It wasn't the overwhelming passion of the movies, but something deeper. Love growing from the roots of absolute trust. "I think," Eleanor said as they sat on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder, "I always knew you were special to me. I just never allowed myself to think about it romantically. Why not? Fear, perhaps. Fear of losing you if it didn't work out." Arthur kissed the top of her head. "You'll never lose me, Ellie, no matter what happens between us." The dream becomes reality. 2 weeks later, they were at the clinic for the first procedure. Eleanor was nervous, but Arthur's constant presence reassured her. He held her hand throughout the process, whispering words of encouragement. "Now we just have to wait," the nurse said with a professional smile. 2 weeks, and we can do the test." The next 2 weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Eleanor oscillated between hope and anxiety, and Arthur had become even more attentive, appearing with her favorite foods and canceling appointments to stay with her. "You're spoiling me too much," she complained one afternoon when he appeared with coconut ice cream, her favorite flavor since childhood. "I'm practicing for when you're pregnant," he replied with a mischievous smile. "And what if it doesn't work on this first attempt?" Arthur sat beside her on the sofa. "Then we try again, as many times as necessary. And what if it never works? Then we will have tried together, and that's more than I had before you accepted." On the eve of the test, Eleanor could barely sleep. Arthur had offered to stay with her, but she needed a night alone to process all the possibilities. She woke before the alarm and lay there, her hand unconsciously over her belly. Could there already be a life growing inside her? Her phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Arthur. "How are you?" "Nervous, anxious, scared. Do you want me to come over?" "No, I'm going to get ready and go straight to the clinic. We'll meet there." "Everything's going to be fine, Ellie. I'm sorry." 2 hours later, they were sitting side by side in the clinic waiting room, their hands intertwined. When the nurse called Eleanor's name, both stood up. "You both can come in," she said with a smile. Dr. Hayes greeted them with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. Eleanor felt her heart race. "All right," he began, looking at the papers in his hands. "I have news for you." Arthur squeezed Eleanor's hand. The test came back negative. The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment she hadn't expected to be so intense. "But," the doctor continued, "this is completely normal. The chances of success on the first attempt are always lower. There's nothing wrong with either of you. We can try again in the next cycle." Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Arthur put his arm around her. "It's all right," he whispered in her ear. "We don't give up." That night, instead of feeling defeated, they felt more united. They had dinner at her apartment, talking about everything except the test result. When it was time for Arthur to leave, neither of them wanted him to go. "Stay," Eleanor said impulsively. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I don't want to be alone today." Arthur stayed the night, but they slept in separate rooms. It was as if both knew they were on the verge of something greater, but weren't quite ready to take that step. The second attempt was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During that time, Their relationship continued to evolve naturally. Arthur practically moved into her apartment, spending most nights there. They cooked together, watched movies, talked late into the night. It was like living as a couple, but without physical intimacy. One night, 2 weeks before the second attempt, they were watching a movie when it started to rain heavily. The sound of the rain against the windows created an intimate atmosphere that neither of them could ignore. "Ellie," he said, "can I ask you an honest question?" She paused the movie and turned to look at him. "Always. Do you feel like we're trying to force something that should happen naturally?" The question took her by surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this thing that's growing between us. Aren't we complicating something that could be simple?" Eleanor studied his face. There was vulnerability there, but also a quiet certainty. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we should stop fighting what we're feeling." Eleanor's heart raced. "Ellie, I love you, Ellie." The words came out more easily than he expected. "Not as a friend. Well, also as a friend, but not just that. I love you as a man loves a woman. I think I always loved you. I just never had the courage to admit it." Eleanor felt tears well up in her eyes. "I love you too. Then why are we waiting? Why don't we try to create this baby in the most natural way possible?" The rain continued to pound against the windows when they kissed again, this time without hesitation. It was different from the first kiss, more urgent, more certain. "Are you sure?" Eleanor whispered as they broke apart. "I've never been so certain of anything in my life." They moved towards her bedroom as if dancing, each gesture deliberate and full of meaning. When Arthur carefully laid her down on the bed, Eleanor saw in his eyes all the love that had accumulated over 20 years of friendship. "You are my family," he said, caressing her face. "You always were." "And you are my home," she replied, pulling him closer. They made love with a tenderness neither of them had ever experienced. It wasn't just about pleasure or conception. It was about two hearts finally recognizing each other as one. Afterwards, lying embraced as the rain calmed outside, Eleanor whispered, "This changes everything again." For the better. For the better. 3 weeks later, Eleanor was back at the clinic, but this time with a strange certainty in her heart. Something was different. Her body felt different. Her feelings were more intense. "Positive," announced Dr. Hayes with a smile. "Congratulations. You're going to be parents." This time, the silence was one of pure joy. Arthur hugged Eleanor, and she felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. "We did it," he whispered. "We did it," she repeated, her hand already protectively over her belly. When they left the clinic that afternoon, holding hands and radiant, both knew their lives had changed forever. Not just because they were going to have a baby, but because they had found a love that had grown from the deepest roots of trust and friendship. "Our baby is going to be born out of true love," Eleanor said, as they walked along Brighton's promenade. "The truest love there is," Arthur agreed, stopping to kiss her under the late afternoon sun. "The love that chooses to stay, no matter what." And as the waves gently broke on the beach, and the ships continued their eternal dance in the harbor, two souls who had met in childhood finally completed each other, ready to bring a new life into the world, a life conceived not only in romantic love, but in the unconditional love of those who choose to build a family based on absolute trust. What do you think of their love story transforming this way? Do you believe their child will strengthen their bond even more? Share your thoughts in the comments. A new family. Chapter news of Eleanor's pregnancy spread through Brighton like ripples expanding from a stone dropped in the sea. First came the whispers in the cultural center, Then the murmured conversations in the dance school hallways. And finally, it reached the business circles where Arthur moved. Eleanor noticed the change in the third week after discovering the pregnancy. Some mothers who used to greet her warmly when they came to pick up their daughters now only nodded formally. Fellow teachers asked indirect questions about how she was feeling lately. The climate of speculation was almost palpable. "Teacher Ellie," Lily said, after a particularly tense class, where Eleanor had noticed some glances and whispers among the older students. "People are saying silly things. You know about it, don't you?" Eleanor sighed, putting away the sound equipment. "What kind of silly things? That you planned all this? That you schemed for Mr. Arthur?" Lily made a face of disapproval, as if they truly knew her. The comment hit Eleanor harder than she expected, not because she believed the gossip, but because she realized that her relationship with Arthur would always be viewed through the lens of the social disparity between them. That night, when Arthur arrived at the apartment, he practically lived there now, keeping only a few clothes in his penthouse in the city center. She told him about the comments. "Ignore them," he said. "People who don't understand. It's not that simple, Arthur. My professional reputation could be affected if the students' mothers start seeing me as a gold digger." Arthur turned to look at her. "Ellie, look at me. Do you care what they think?" "I shouldn't care, but—" Eleanor put down her spoon and leaned against the counter. "But it's hard to ignore when they question the sincerity of my feelings, when they suggest that our child was conceived out of self-interest." Arthur's expression hardened. "Do you want me to talk to those people?" "No!" The answer came out more vehemently than she intended. "That would only confirm what they think. That I need you to protect me. That I'm dependent on your money and influence." Arthur remained silent for a moment, processing. "Then what do you suggest? That we continue living our truth. And if necessary, I'll prove my professional worth in other ways." In the following week, Eleanor made a decision that surprised everyone, including Arthur. She enrolled in a therapeutic dance specialization course in London, an intensive weekend program that would last 3 months. "Why now?" Arthur asked when she told him about the enrollment. "Because I want to show that I'm continuing to invest in my career. That pregnancy hasn't turned me into someone who only lives through her relationship." "But you're pregnant. Shouldn't you avoid overexerting yourself?" "I'm pregnant, not sick, and I need this for myself as much as to silence others." The course meant traveling to London every weekend. Arthur offered to accompany her, but she refused. "I need to do this alone." The first trip was difficult. Eleanor felt nauseous throughout the train journey and arrived at the course feeling insecure and physically uncomfortable. But when she started to move, when she felt the music flowing through her veins and saw other professionals recognizing her natural talent, something reignited within her. "You have a very special quality," said Professor Evans, the course coordinator, after a particularly intense session. "Your movements carry a rare emotional depth." Eleanor smiled, feeling professionally validated in a way she had forgotten was possible. In the following weeks, she returned from London energized and confident. Arthur noticed the change immediately. "You're radiant," he said one night, as she talked about the techniques she had learned. "I'm remembering who I am, besides being your girlfriend, or the future mother of your child." The answer might have sounded offensive, but Arthur understood. "And is that important to you?" "It's essential." The turning point came during the mid-course presentation. Eleanor had created a choreography that expressed the journey of motherhood, the fears, the joys, the transformations. When she finished dancing, the auditorium was silent for a few seconds before erupting in applause. Professor Evans sought her out afterwards. "Eleanor, have you considered teaching here in London? We have a vacancy for next semester." The offer was tempting and completely unexpected. A position in London would mean national recognition, professional growth, total financial independence. It would also mean leaving Brighton, That night, on the train back, Eleanor gazed at the landscape passing by the window and thought about the complexity of her situation. On one hand, she had the opportunity to definitively prove her professional worth. On the other, it would mean separating from Arthur just as they were building a family. She decided not to tell him about the offer immediately. She needed to process the implications first. During the following week, she observed Arthur more attentively. She saw how he lit up when he talked about the baby, how he had started reading books on fatherhood, how he affectionately touched her belly every morning before getting up. She also noticed how he had changed his routine to adapt to their life together. He turned down business dinners that would keep them apart. He canceled non-essential trips. He delegated more responsibilities to be able to spend more time at home. "Don't you miss your old life?" she asked him one night as they watched a movie. "What life?" Arthur seemed genuinely confused. "Your life as a successful bachelor. Freedom to travel whenever you wanted. To go out with whoever you wanted." Arthur paused the movie and turned to look at her. "Ellie, my old life was empty. I had money, success, professional respect, but I came home to 4 silent walls every night. Now I have a family. But what if I received a job offer somewhere else? What if my career took me away from Brighton?" "Did you get an offer?" Arthur asked, sensing something in the way she had asked the question. Eleanor hesitated. Then she told him about the London proposal. He saw a series of emotions cross Arthur's face: surprise, concern, and finally something that looked like pride. "It's an incredible opportunity," he finally said. "It is, and you want me to accept it?" "I don't know. It's complicated." Arthur remained silent for a long moment. "Ellie, if you accept it, I'm going with you." "What?" His response completely surprised her. "I can manage the company from anywhere. Technology allows it, and London has the largest container port in England. It would even be beneficial for business." "Arthur, you can't just rearrange your entire life because I received a job offer." "Why not? Aren't you rearranging yours so we can have a family?" "That's different." "How?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer. She realized there were assumptions in her own expectations that she hadn't questioned. "Think about it this way," Arthur continued. "Wouldn't it be good for our child to grow up in an environment where both parents are professionally fulfilled, where neither of us had to choose between family and career?" The prospect was attractive, but Eleanor still had reservations. "What if people say you're following me because of the pregnancy, that you're being controlled by me?" Arthur laughed. "Ellie, let me tell you a secret. People who don't have a life of their own will always comment on other people's lives. We can't live based on what they'll say. But your company, your family, your roots, my company will prosper wherever I am, as long as I work well. And as for family," he gently touched her belly, "my family is here. My roots are wherever you two are." That night, lying in bed, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't experienced since discovering the pregnancy. Not only because the London question was resolved, they had decided to accept the offer and move together, but because she finally understood that true love isn't about sacrificing for the other, but about growing together. "Arthur," she whispered in the dark. Thank you for not asking me to choose between you and my career. Thank you for not asking me to choose between my career and our family. Do you think we'll make it? A new life in London with the baby coming?" Arthur pulled her closer. "I'm sure, because we're not running away from anything. We're running towards our future." And as the sound of Brighton's waves lulled them to sleep, both knew they had made the right decision. Not the easiest or most conventional decision, but the decision that honored both the love they felt for each other and the individual dreams that made them complete. In 3 months, they would be in London, building a new life away from the whispers and judgments of a small city. But they would take with them everything that mattered: the love that had grown from the roots of the deepest friendship, the child who was growing as a symbol of that love, and the confidence that together they could face any challenge the future brought. What do you think of Arthur's sacrifice for Eleanor's career? Do you believe they will thrive in London? Share your thoughts below. Settling in London and a proposal of forever. The move to London happened like a carefully choreographed dance. Arthur had organized everything down to the smallest detail. The gradual transfer of company operations, the search for an apartment that would be perfect for them, even researching the best obstetricians in the city. Eleanor, now 5 months pregnant, watched the movers carry her few but beloved possessions onto the truck. Each box represented an entire life in Brighton. Photographs of Grandma Margaret, dance trophies from her adolescence, books she had collected over the years. "Are you regretting it?" Arthur asked, noticing the melancholy in her eyes. "Not exactly regret. It's more an anticipated nostalgia." She touched her prominent belly. "Our baby will never know Brighton the way we did, but they'll know it in new ways, and we can always go back to visit." The apartment Arthur had chosen was in Shoreditch, a modern London neighborhood that managed to combine urban sophistication with green spaces. It was spacious enough to comfortably accommodate a growing family, but not so ostentatious as to make Eleanor feel out of place. "What do you think?" he asked anxiously when they arrived at their new home for the first time. Eleanor walked through the spacious rooms, observing the wide windows that offered a view of a nearby park. There was something cozy about the space, something that immediately made her feel at home. "It's perfect," she said, stopping on the balcony overlooking the park. "Our child will be able to play down there." Arthur hugged her from behind, his hands automatically finding her belly. "Do you think they'll like football or dance?" "Why not both?" The first few weeks in London were a period of intense adjustment. Eleanor began her classes at the dance school, discovering that the level of demand and sophistication was much higher than she had experienced in Brighton. Her colleagues were experienced professionals, some with international training, and initially she felt intimidated. "I don't know if I'm good enough," she confessed to Arthur one particularly difficult night, after a class where she had felt completely lost during a discussion about European contemporary dance techniques. "You're 5 months pregnant, and you still impressed enough to get a spot that hundreds of people wanted," he reminded her. "Give it time." The turning point came 3 weeks later, during a practical class. The professor had asked each student to create a sequence that expressed transformation, and Eleanor created a choreography inspired by her own journey, from loneliness to connection, from fear to courage, from friendship to love. When she finished dancing, the studio was silent. Then, spontaneous applause filled the space. "That," said Professor Adams, the program coordinator, "is exactly the kind of emotional authenticity we're looking for. You're not just executing movements, you're telling a story." From that moment on, Eleanor found her place in the program. Her colleagues began to seek her out for collaborations, and she discovered that her practical experience in Brighton, combined with her natural intuition, offered a unique and valuable perspective. Arthur, for his part, was discovering that managing the business from London was more stimulating than he had anticipated. Brighton's port continued to be the company's main base, but the proximity to London opened new opportunities for partnerships and expansion. "You know," he said one night as they dined on the balcony, overlooking the illuminated park, "I think this move was good for both of us professionally." "I agree, but I miss the beach sometimes. We can go to Brighton on weekends whenever we want, and Bournemouth is nearby." That's exactly what they did the following Saturday. Arthur suggested a trip to Bournemouth just to kill the nostalgia for the sea. Eleanor enthusiastically accepted, happy at the prospect of feeling the sea breeze again. What she didn't expect was that Arthur had other plans besides a simple outing. They walked along Bournemouth Beach in the late afternoon, Eleanor wearing a loose dress that comfortably accommodated her 6-month belly. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected in the gentle waves. "Ellie," Arthur said suddenly, stopping walking. "Hmm?" She turned to look at him and noticed something different in his expression. Nervousness mixed with a determination she recognized from the most important moments of their lives. "There's something I need to tell you." Eleanor's heart raced. "What?" Arthur took a deep breath, looking alternately at her and the sea. "When we were children, I used to imagine what my life would be like when I grew up. I dreamed of business success, professional achievements, recognition." He paused, watching a group of children playing on the nearby sand. "But I never dreamed of happiness. I never imagined what it would be like to wake up every day next to someone who truly loves me, or what it would be like to feel my child moving inside the belly of the woman I love." Eleanor felt tears forming in her eyes, anticipating where the conversation was leading. "You gave me all that, Ellie. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home." Arthur knelt in the sand, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Eleanor brought her hands to her mouth, her heart pounding. "I know we started this as friends, deciding to have a child together, but it turned into something much bigger. It turned into the most beautiful love story I could imagine." He opened the box, revealing a delicate but dazzling ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds that captured and reflected the sunset light. "Eleanor Green, will you marry me? Not because we're having a baby, but because I can't imagine living the rest of my life without you by my side." Tears were already streaming freely down Eleanor's face. "Arthur, I promise I will love and respect you always. I promise I will support your dreams as much as you support mine. I promise our family will always be based on true love, not just convenience." Eleanor looked at the man kneeling before her, the lonely child who had become her best friend, the friend who had become the love of her life, the father of the baby growing inside her. She saw in his face all the sincerity and vulnerability that had always characterized their most important moments. "Yes," she whispered. Then she repeated louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Arthur stood up and kissed her as he placed the ring on her finger. The kiss was salty with both their tears, sweet with happiness, and deep with the love that had grown so organically and truly. When they separated, Eleanor admired the ring. "It's beautiful. How did you know exactly what I'd like? The emerald reminds me of the color of the sea here in the north. I thought it would be a way to always carry a little piece of where our story began." They stayed on the beach until the stars appeared, talking about the wedding, about the future, about the names they were considering for the baby. It was as if the marriage proposal had solidified something that already existed between them, making it official in the eyes of the world. "When do you want to get married?" Eleanor asked. "Before the baby is born. I want them to arrive into an officially constituted family. Something simple, intimate." "I agree. Just the people who really matter." In the following week, they began to plan a small but meaningful wedding. They decided to hold it in London, in a historic chapel in the city center, followed by an intimate dinner for about 20 people. The guest list was carefully considered. Professor Mary, a few close colleagues from both, Arthur's oldest employees, and some of the new friends they had made in London. "You know what's funny?" Eleanor said one night, as they addressed the invitations by hand. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be planning my wedding in London, pregnant with my childhood best friend's child, I would have thought it was impossible. And now it seems like the only thing that made sense to happen. The wedding dress was a small adventure in itself. Eleanor wanted something that would comfortably accommodate her 7-month belly, but still make her feel beautiful and special. After several frustrations in traditional shops, She decided to create her own dress with the help of a seamstress as recommended by a colleague from the dance school. The result was a champagne-colored silk dress with an empire cut that flowed gracefully over her pregnant silhouette. Simple but elegant, exactly as she wanted. In the week of the wedding, Arthur was surprisingly nervous. "It's just a wedding," Eleanor teased, finding him pacing the apartment. "We already live together. We're already having a child. What could go wrong?" "What if you change your mind at the last minute?" he asked, only half joking. Eleanor stopped what she was doing and approached him. "Arthur Reed, do you really think that after everything we've been through, all the decisions we've made together, I would change my mind about marrying you?" "No, but there are no buts. You are my gift from destiny, my best friend, my great love, the father of my child. There is nothing in this world that would make me change my mind about spending the rest of my life with you." The eve of the wedding was quiet. They had dinner at home, talked about what it would be like to wake up the next day as husband and wife, and Arthur spent a long time with his hand on Eleanor's belly, quietly talking to the baby. "Tomorrow your parents get married," he whispered, "and you'll officially be a Reed Green." "Or Green Reed," Eleanor corrected, smiling. "Or we create a completely new name, Reed Green Family. I think we'll have time to decide that." That night they slept embraced, Arthur with his hand protectively over Eleanor's belly, both dreaming of the future they were about to formalize. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. No more just a couple expecting a baby, but a family about to become complete in every possible sense. Only a few hours remained until they became husband and wife, and both could barely wait to take that final step towards the future they had built together. Brick by brick, choice by choice, with all the love and care two people can dedicate to creating a true family. What are your thoughts on their unconventional path to marriage? Do you believe their love will continue to grow after the baby arrives? Share your predictions in the comments. A new life, a complete family. The wedding took place on a golden October morning at St. Jude's Chapel in London's historic centre. Eleanor woke up with butterflies in her stomach, a combination of pre-wedding nerves and the baby's increasingly active movements, now at 8 months. "Good morning, Mom," Arthur said, gently kissing her forehead. "How are you two feeling today?" "Anxious to officially become a family," she replied, her hand automatically going to her belly. The ceremony was exactly as they had dreamed, intimate, emotional, and full of meaning. Professor Mary had made the trip from Brighton especially for the wedding, and her tears of joy during the vows were one of the most touching moments of the morning. "Arthur Reed," Eleanor said during her vows, her voice firm despite the emotion. "You were my first friend, my greatest confidant, and now you are the love of my life. I promise to walk by your side in all the adventures life brings us." "Eleanor Green," Arthur replied, holding her hands firmly. "You transformed my empty house into a home full of love. I promise to protect our family and nurture our love every day of my life." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the kiss was sweet and full of promises. The baby chose that exact moment to give a particularly strong kick, making both of them laugh in the middle of the kiss. "I think someone approves," Arthur whispered. The wedding dinner was held at a cozy restaurant in Shoreditch, with a view of a blooming garden. It was small enough for everyone to converse like a big family, but elegant enough to mark the importance of the moment. During the toast, Arthur stood up, clearly emotional. "I want to thank everyone for being here today, especially Professor Mary, who taught us that true love sometimes needs time to blossom." He looked at Eleanor, "and my wife, who showed me that family is much more than DNA. It's choice, it's commitment, it's unconditional love." Eleanor was so emotional that she could barely make her own toast. "Thank you for celebrating with us. What happens when two hearts finally find their place in the world? Their honeymoon was postponed until after the baby's birth, but they spent their first night as husband and wife in the apartment, now officially the home of the Reed Green family. "I can't believe we're married," Eleanor said, admiring her wedding band next to her engagement ring. "I can. It seems like it was always inevitable, doesn't it?" The following weeks were a mix of final preparations for the baby and adjusting to married life. The nursery had been ready for weeks: soft beige walls, light wood furniture, and a nursing chair positioned near the window overlooking the park. Arthur had become almost obsessive about having everything prepared: maternity bag ready from 34 weeks, route to the hospital timed at different hours of the day, even a list of emergency medical contacts taped to the fridge. "You're more nervous than me," Eleanor observed one night, finding him reorganizing the maternity bag for the third time that week. "What if something happens? What if I don't make it to the hospital on time? What if—" "Arthur!" She interrupted his worries with a kiss. "Everything's going to be fine. Our child is going to be born surrounded by love, and that's all that matters." The first real contraction came on a Tuesday morning when Eleanor was getting ready for her classes. It was different from the practice contractions she had been feeling for weeks. More intense, more determined. "I think it's today," she calmly told Arthur, who was drinking coffee. He almost dropped his cup. "Now? Are you sure? Could it be a false alarm?" Another stronger contraction answered the question. The drive to the hospital was surreally calm. Arthur drove with excessive care, checking on Eleanor at every traffic light, while she breathed deeply and tried not to think about the increasing intensity of the contractions. "Are you scared?" he asked when they stopped at another traffic light. "I am," she admitted, "but also anxious. Today we're going to meet our child." "Our child?" Arthur repeated, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. Labor was long. 12 hours of contractions that gradually increased in intensity and frequency. Arthur didn't leave Eleanor's side for a minute, holding her hand, helping her with breathing exercises, whispering words of encouragement. "I can't do this anymore," Eleanor said, during a particularly intense contraction around 8 p.m. "Yes, you can," Arthur said, stroking her sweaty hair. "You're the strongest person I know, and our baby is almost here." As if responding to his words, the next series of contractions signaled that the moment had arrived. "It's time," announced Dr. Thompson, the obstetrician. "On the next contraction, push." What followed was a mix of intense pain, superhuman effort, and a determination Eleanor didn't know she possessed. Arthur remained by her side throughout the process, his words of encouragement being the anchor that kept her focused. "I can see the head," Dr. Thompson exclaimed. "One more push, Eleanor." And then, at 9:47 p.m. on a perfect Tuesday in November, the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the baby for them to see. Eleanor collapsed in tears of relief and absolute joy. Arthur was also crying, looking at his son with an expression of complete awe. "He's perfect," Arthur whispered, when the nurse placed the baby on Eleanor's chest. The baby truly was perfect. Small, but healthy. With dark hair like his father's, and a delicate nose like his mother's. When he opened his eyes for the first time, they were a deep blue that would probably change with time. "Hello, Daniel," Eleanor whispered, gently touching her son's cheek. "We finally meet you." Daniel Reed Green weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and measured 20 inches, numbers that would forever become important in his parents' memory. The first night in the hospital was magical and exhausting at the same time. Daniel immediately showed he had his own personality, calm when held by one of his parents, but expressive about his needs when he was hungry or uncomfortable. "He already knows what he wants," Arthur observed, rocking his son while Eleanor tried to rest. "He takes after his father," she murmured, drowsy but smiling. The first few days at home were a complete revolution in their routine. Arthur had taken 2 full weeks off work, something his oldest employees had never seen happen. He was completely dedicated to learning how to be a father. Diaper changes, baths, sleepless nights split equally with Eleanor. "You don't have to do everything," Eleanor said one morning, finding him preparing breakfast while rocking Daniel with one hand. "I want to do everything. I want to be present in every moment." Daniel proved to be a relatively easy baby, but even so, the adjustment was intense. Eleanor discovered that breastfeeding, though natural, required practice and patience. Arthur discovered that he could function with much less sleep than he imagined, as long as it was for a good cause. "You know what's funny?" Eleanor said one night while breastfeeding Daniel in the nursery chair. "I used to think my life was complete. Dance, independence, tranquility. Now I realize I was just waiting for you two." Arthur, who was organizing the baby's clean clothes, stopped to look at the scene, his wife holding his son, both bathed in the soft lamplight. "I also spent my days chasing contracts and meetings, thinking that was success. But real success is this. It's waking up every morning knowing I have a family that loves me." When Daniel turned 1 month old, they made their first trip back to Brighton. It was important for both of them that the baby knew the city where his parents had grown up and fallen in love. Professor Mary received them as if Daniel were her own grandson, crying with emotion as she held him for the first time. "He has your eyes, Eleanor, but Arthur's smile," she observed. They walked along the promenade where they had taken so many walks in childhood and adolescence, now as a complete family. Daniel slept peacefully in his stroller, apparently approving of the sea breeze. "One day we'll tell him how it all began," Arthur said, stopping at the same spot where he had proposed. "We'll tell him it started with a crazy proposal and turned into the most beautiful love story in the world," Eleanor replied. Enduring love and a growing family. 3 months later, when Daniel was already smiling responsively and beginning to show his unique personality, Eleanor returned to her classes in London. It was a big step to leave her son for the first time to go back to work. "Everything's going to be fine," Arthur reassured her that first morning. "I'll be with him all the time, and you're just a call away." "I know, it's different." But when Eleanor started dancing again, when she felt the music flowing through her veins and saw the respect in her students' eyes, she knew she had made the right decision. She could be a dedicated mother and a fulfilled artist. She didn't need to choose between the two. Arthur also discovered that fatherhood had changed his perspective on work. He delegated more, worked more efficiently, and always prioritized being home for dinner and for Daniel's bedtime ritual. "You've become an incredible father," Eleanor said one night, watching him read a story to Daniel, who was clearly more interested in trying to eat the book than listen to it. "I learned from the best mother in the world." When Daniel turned 6 months old, they had a small party in the apartment. It was incredible to see how the baby had become the gravitational center of their lives, without diminishing the love between them as a couple. On the contrary, it seemed to have intensified everything. During the party, while watching Daniel interact with the guests, trying to grab everything that came near his curious little hands, Arthur led Eleanor to a quiet corner of the balcony. "Remember when you asked me why I had chosen you to have a child?" he asked. "I remember. I said it was because you truly knew me, but it wasn't just that." "It wasn't?" "No. Because even without knowing it, I was already in love with you. I think I always was. I just needed an excuse to finally admit it." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "And I needed a reason to risk my heart. Thank you for giving me that reason." They looked at Daniel, who was being passed from lap to lap by the guests, charming everyone with his smiles and coos. "He's going to grow up knowing he's loved," Eleanor said. "He's going to grow up knowing that family is about choice, about commitment, about two people who decide to build something beautiful together, and about how true love sometimes comes disguised as a crazy proposal from a desperate friend," Eleanor added, laughing. "Hey, that proposal was great. Look where it brought us." That night, after all the guests had left, and Daniel was sleeping peacefully in his crib, Arthur and Eleanor sat on the balcony overlooking the park. It was one of their favorite rituals, a few minutes of shared silence at the end of the day, just absorbing the gratitude for everything they had built together. "Are you happy?" Arthur asked, a question that had become regular between them. "Completely." "And you?" "Happier than I ever thought possible." Eleanor snuggled closer to him, watching the city lights stretch to the horizon. Somewhere distant, she could imagine the sea of Brighton where it all began. Somewhere nearby, their son slept peacefully, dreaming his baby dreams. "You know what impresses me most?" she said. "What?" "How everything fit perfectly. Your loneliness, my need for purpose, our love that was just waiting for the right moment to bloom, as if the universe had a plan all along. Maybe it did. Maybe we were always destined to be a family. We just needed to grow enough to realize it." They remained in silence for a few more minutes, soaking in the perfection of that moment. It wasn't the flawless perfection of fairy tales, but the imperfect perfection of real life. Sleepless nights, worries about the future, daily challenges. But all of that wrapped in a love so deep and true that it made every difficulty worth it. "I love you, Eleanor Reed Green," Arthur said, using her full name for the first time since the wedding. "I love you, Arthur Reed Green," she replied, and both laughed at the affectionate formality. And as London continued its nightlife around them, as time passed in its eternal dance, and as their son slept protected by his parents' love, Arthur and Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that they had found their safe harbor forever. Their family was complete. Their love story had become reality, and whatever the future held, they would face it together, as it should have been from the beginning. The apartment in Shoreditch had grown along with the family. The walls were now decorated with Daniel's drawings, photographs of family vacations in Brighton, and certificates of both parents' professional achievements. Eleanor had opened her own therapeutic dance school, which had become a benchmark in London. Arthur had expanded the shipping company internationally, but always maintaining the balance between work and family. Daniel, now 5 years old, was a perfect blend of his parents. He had Eleanor's natural grace for movement and Arthur's intellectual curiosity for everything related to the sea. On weekends, when they visited Brighton, the boy ran on the beach, asking about every ship he saw on the horizon. "Dad, is that ship coming from very far away?" Daniel asked, pointing to a cargo ship in the distance. "Probably from some European port," Arthur replied, carrying his son on his shoulders. "Maybe from France or Italy. And it carries important things. Everything that travels by sea is important to someone somewhere," Arthur explained, using the same words his father had told him when he was Daniel's age. Eleanor observed these interactions with a tenderness that never faded. Daniel had also inherited her love for dance, and she often found him moving to the rhythm of imaginary music, creating his own choreographies with the seriousness of a little artist. "Mommy, can I learn to dance like you?" Daniel had asked one day after seeing Eleanor practice at home. "Would you like to?" "Yes, I want to tell stories with my body like you do." That simple phrase had filled Eleanor's heart with indescribable joy. Not because she wanted Daniel to follow in her exact footsteps, but because she saw in him the same intuitive understanding of art that had guided her own life. Now, Daniel took dance classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and swimming lessons on Wednesdays and Fridays. Saturdays were for family, parks, museums, or trips to Brighton. Sundays were for quiet at home, cooking together, reading stories, and simply enjoying being together. "You know what I like most about our family?" Daniel had asked Eleanor one night, as she read him a story before bed. "What, my love? The daddy and mommy laugh a lot together." It was a simple but profound observation. At 5 years old, Daniel had already learned that love wasn't just about pretty words, but about everyday joy, shared laughter, and the way two people cared for each other. On the 6th anniversary of their first meeting after years of separation, a date they now celebrated as the crazy proposal day, Eleanor had a surprise for Arthur. They were having dinner at the same restaurant where they had had their wedding dinner, while Daniel stayed with Professor Mary, who had come to London to take care of her grandson for the weekend. "Remember what you said 6 years ago?" Eleanor asked, nervously playing with her napkin. "I said a lot of things 6 years ago," Arthur replied, smiling. "You'll have to be more specific. You said you wanted to have one child. Only one." "Yes, and we got the most perfect one in the world." Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "And what if I told you we could have another?" Arthur looked at her confused. "Another? Are you talking about adoption?" In response, Eleanor took a small box from her bag, similar to the one he had used for the engagement ring. But this time, it was she who held the surprise. "Open it," she whispered. Inside the box was a small black and white photograph, an ultrasound. Arthur looked at it for a moment before fully understanding what he saw. His eyes filled with tears as he looked alternately at the image and his wife's radiant face. "I'm 8 weeks pregnant," Eleanor confirmed. "It's going to be a girl." Arthur's reaction was immediate. He stood up, walked around the table, and hugged her so tightly he almost lifted her out of her chair, not caring about the curious glances of other diners. "A girl," he repeated, as if he needed to say it out loud to believe it. "We're going to have a girl. Daniel is going to be a big brother. Does he know yet? I wanted to tell you first, but I have a feeling he'll be excited." That night, when they picked Daniel up from Professor Mary's house, the three of them sat on the sofa to share the news. "Daniel," Eleanor began, "Daddy and I have something very special to tell you." "What is it?" Arthur took his son's small hands. "You're going to have a little sister." Daniel looked at them for a moment, processing the information. "A real sister, like Maria has?" "Yes, like Maria has." Daniel's face lit up with a huge smile. "I can teach her to dance, and Dad can teach her about the ships." "You'll be able to do both," Eleanor laughed. "When is she going to arrive?" "In about 7 months," Arthur explained. "That's a long time," Daniel complained, with the natural impatience of a 5-year-old. "But it'll go fast," Eleanor reassured him. "And in the meantime, you can help us prepare everything to welcome her." And so began a new chapter in the story of the Reed Green family. Sophie Reed Green was born on a sunny spring afternoon, after a much shorter labor than Daniel's. From the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear she had a completely different personality from her brother. While Daniel had been a contemplative and calm baby, Sophie was expressive and determined. She had Arthur's green eyes, but Eleanor's delicate facial structure, and from a very young age, she showed a natural inclination towards music and movement. Daniel took his role as big brother with adorable seriousness. He insisted on helping with everything. He sang to her when she cried, helped her choose her clothes, and had self-appointed himself as her official protector. "Sophie can't eat that," he would tell any visitor who tried to give her something inappropriate for babies. "She only drinks mommy's milk. She's too small for those toys," he would warn when someone offered her something inappropriate for her age. The family dynamic adjusted naturally to accommodate the new member. Eleanor had decided to take a full year of leave this time, wanting to fully enjoy Sophie's first few months. Arthur had reorganized his schedule even more to be present for all important moments. 2 children changes everything, Eleanor confessed to Arthur one night, as Sophie slept in her arms, and Daniel read a book on the sofa. For better or for worse? Definitely for the better, but it's more intense, more chaotic, more love than I thought possible to feel. Arthur looked at his family, his radiant wife despite her tiredness, his son concentrating on his book, his daughter sleeping peacefully. "You know what I think?" he said. "What?" "I think we were always destined to be a family of 4. Daniel needed a sister, and Sophie needed an older brother." As if she had heard the conversation, Sophie opened her eyes and smiled for the first time, a smile directed directly at her father. "I think she agrees," Eleanor whispered. 10 years after Arthur's first proposal, the Reed Green family had grown not only in number, but in every possible way. Daniel, now 15, had inherited his father's passion for maritime business and was considering studying naval engineering, but also maintained his love for dance as a form of personal expression. Sophie, at 10 years old, had proven to be a little entrepreneur in the making, organizing dance shows in the neighborhood and convincing half of Shoreditch to attend her performances. She had Arthur's business determination and Eleanor's artistic creativity. Eleanor had expanded her therapeutic dance school to 5 locations in London and had published a book on the use of dance in emotional healing. Arthur had been named Entrepreneur of the Year by the London Chamber of Commerce, but his favorite achievement remained coming home every night for family dinner. On a summer afternoon, while the entire family was in Brighton visiting Professor Mary, now 84 but still full of energy, they sat on the same beach where it all began. Daniel and Sophie played at the shoreline, building elaborate sandcastles that combined architectural precision with artistic creativity. Eleanor and Arthur watched them from their spot on the sand, holding hands as always. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Making that crazy proposal so many years ago." Arthur looked at her as if she had said something absurd. "Ellie, that crazy proposal gave me everything I didn't know I needed. It gave me you, it gave me our children, it gave me a family, it gave me a life worth living, even if it was a very unconventional way to start, especially because it was unconventional." Arthur pointed towards their children. "Look at what we created. Not just 2 incredible children, but a love story that has grown for over a decade. A family that works because it's based on friendship, respect, and true love." Sophie ran towards them, sand even in her eyelashes. "Mommy, Daddy, come see our castle!" "Daniel says it's a 15th century fortress, but I say it's a princess dancer's palace. Why can't it be both?" Eleanor suggested, getting up to follow her daughter. "Exactly," Sophie exclaimed. "A fortress palace of warrior princesses who are also dancers." As they walked towards their children's elaborate sand creation, Arthur reflected on the journey that had brought them to that moment. The desperate loneliness that had led him to make that unthinkable proposal was now a distant memory, replaced by a fullness he hadn't known was possible. "Hey," Daniel said, when they approached the castle, "are you ever going to tell us the full story of how you met?" Eleanor and Arthur looked at each other and smiled. "Do you want the short version or the long version?" Arthur asked. "The long one," Danielle and Sophie said in unison, and as the sun began to set over Brighton Bay, painting the sky in the same golden tones of that afternoon, so many years ago when 2 childhood friends reconnected, Arthur and Eleanor began to tell the story. The story of how a desperate proposal had become the foundation of an extraordinary family. The story of how 2 hearts that had always been connected had finally found the courage to admit their love. The story of how the best life plans are sometimes the ones we never plan. And so, Eleanor concluded, as Sophie snuggled against her and Daniel leaned on Arthur's shoulder. We learned that sometimes the scariest decisions are the ones that lead us to the greatest happiness. And happily ever after? Sophie asked, using the traditional fairy tale phrase. No, Arthur said, smiling. This story continues. Every day we write a new chapter. And as the stars began to appear over Brighton, the Reed Green family knew that although their story had begun with an impossible proposal, it would continue to be written with love, laughter, and the certainty that they had found exactly where they belonged, together. Thus, dear listeners, Eleanor and Arthur proved that true love doesn't need scripts. It grows from the roots of absolute trust and blossoms when two souls finally find the courage to surrender completely. They discovered that sometimes our greatest happiness is born from the most terrifying decisions, when we accept impossible proposals and wake up realizing we've built a family without even noticing, that a friend's request can transform into the most beautiful declaration of love in the world, and that real love is that which not only chooses us, but grows with us every day. Daniel and Sophie taught us that children have the power to transform houses into homes, and that sometimes they are the bridge between two hearts that were always destined to meet. Eleanor showed us that a brave woman can have it all: career, love, and family, without having to choose between them. And Arthur demonstrated that a true man not only offers security, but builds dreams alongside the woman he loves. If this story warmed your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to not miss any of our emotional journeys. Share in the comments. Do you believe the best loves begin with the deepest friendships, or that sometimes we need to accept crazy proposals to discover our destiny? And always remember, somewhere in the world, there is someone who already knows your soul and is just waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Don't give up on believing in the love that grows slowly, in the love that builds solid foundations, in the love that transforms childhood friends into lifelong families. We'll see you in the next story here on Endless Story, where every unexpected proposal can be the beginning of a fairy tale, and every brave yes can change a life forever. Until then, have the courage to say yes to impossible dreams, because sometimes they are exactly what our heart was waiting for. A tight hug to each of your hearts.